one of the great things about having an in-person event is that you get to meet people who you don't actually have a lot of opportunity otherwise. We met with Christy and Paola, just having lunch. They're from Saskatoon, one of our collection sites. So great, and we took pictures, and we're going to post it on LinkedIn and stuff like that. So it's really fun. Congrats to those who won prizes, even if it was a Edmonton Oilers jersey. Just kidding, Shauna. It's on, right? I'm very happy to sort of start off this afternoon. We've got a great speaker who I'll introduce in just one second. But just to frame up what's happening this afternoon, we're going to have a speaker, and then we're going to go into our panel discussion. As I mentioned earlier, it's a bit more of a focus on psychological health and safety, and so it adds a different slant to employee health and well-being and how that may impact your workplace, your bottom line, your culture. So it's a very relevant issue that's happening, that's coming to bear. We've just celebrated World Mental Health Day on October 10th. That was just 3 days ago on Thanksgiving, as it happened to be. And so timely for us to bring this topic to bear. And I'm so pleased to have Harry Chettiar, who's with Chettiar Counselling and Associates. Harry's a psychotherapist. He's had some great opportunities to spend to exert his wisdom on the DriverCheck family. He's had a couple of sessions with us to talk about mental health in the workplace, and I'm so very pleased to welcome him up on stage today to talk to us about managing anxiety. Harry Chettiar, please.
All right. Can everyone? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I see that they got me labeled as MindCentre trucker. I don't know if that was a mistake or if they've embraced me as a trucker family. But my name is Harry Chettiar, and I am the clinical director of Chettiar Counselling and Associates. I am a registered psychotherapist. And Jonathan, I feel like he's really said a lot of good things about me. My bar is down here. And especially after seeing Shelley's talk. Is she here still? Oh, there she is, yeah. She's also set the bar pretty high. So at first, I wasn't glad that I was going to be after lunch, but I'm glad that there was a bit of a break between Shelley and I, because you're going to see a lot of what I'm going to say is going to feel a little bit repetitive, and it would be extremely hard to follow her. I think she is a wise one. And she actually reminds me of Brené Brown. It's one of her books that she put up there. I think what is it called? Daring to Lead, yes. So anyone that doesn't know Brené Brown, she's a professor in the States, talks about psychology, vulnerability, all of that good stuff. So I'm not going to be able to live up to that. I'm just an ordinary brown man who is a psychotherapist. And before the pandemic, that was quite ordinary. Now it's sort of become extraordinary being a brown man and a psychotherapist. A lot of women call me and ask me, can you help my husband? All right. Okay, so although I'm here to talk to you about managing anxiety, I'm also here to talk to you about how defining yourself and people by anxiety can really have an impact on the way they view themselves. And so I think a big part of it is really being able to not just manage anxiety, but change the relationship that we have with ourselves while we're feeling anxious. And so I can tell you that when they called me for this talk, I was really surprised. I was like, really? You guys want me back? Are you sure? And the last time I did this, it was virtually, and I felt like I was speaking to my laptop, and that wasn't fun. And so when they called me back, there was a part of me that was really excited to be able to see people in person. And although it's nice to see people in person, when I'm in a room full of people, there's a part of me naturally feeling anxious. And so as I'm talking to you about anxiety, I'm also dealing with my own anxiety. And there's a part of me that's trying to protect me, and it's saying, well, you're in front of a whole bunch of people that you don't know. Fortunately, I was wise enough to come yesterday and share a few drinks with a bunch of people. So I do know some people in the group. I see Carrie there. I see Ben. I see, where's PJ? There he is. And I see JD. So it's really nice to see familiar faces. And God forbid the latest COVID variant changes some of us into zombies. I'm going to have a tribe full of people that are going to be with me to protect me. Hopefully that doesn't happen. If it does happen, I can see JD taking his chair and just whacking people. All right. Okay, so when it comes to anxiety, I think with COVID, there's been a lot more talk about anxiety, and I think our awareness around anxiety has really gone up, but I'm not sure to what degree we have a depth of understanding around anxiety. I think in general, a lot of people are talking about anxiety, but as a psychotherapist, I have the privilege of being, in a confidential space with a person really sharing the depth of their pain and their experience with something like anxiety. And so I'm hoping today not just to help you become more aware, but also really understand anxiety on a deeper level, and also be able to do something about it in the workplace. So some organizational strategies to implement and help people that work within your companies, but also help yourselves. So when it comes to anxiety, I think Shelley talked about this in her presentation, this idea of 3 parts of the brain. So if we kind of, in a simplistic way, there are 3 parts of the brain, and Dr. Dan Siegel, a neuroscientist, talks about it, and there's the reptilian brain, so the oldest part of our brain. He uses a hand model, so that's why I have my hand up here. So the reptilian brain is like the oldest ancient part of our brain, responsible for regulatory functions like our body temperature, heartbeat, all of that kind of stuff, adrenaline. And then you have the limbic system, that's sort of the midbrain, which is responsible for our behaviors, our emotions, and all of that. And then you have the higher functioning part of the brain, the cortex, where we can think logically and so forth. And what tends to happen when we're feeling really anxious, this part of the brain is what's firing, right? So then we start to lose touch with the higher functioning part of our brain, and it becomes harder to do things like, regulate ourselves and have helpful thoughts. And so that's where when someone is feeling anxious and you're trying to tell them something that's going to be helpful, which might be obvious to you because you're not feeling anxious, they're going to have a really hard time connecting with that because they're just not in that state of their mind. And when it comes to anxiety, it's different from fear, and I can show you an example. I'll go here. So the difference between fear and anxiety. So I didn't Google East Indian boy stuck in chair. That's actually my son. And funny story, so we were at this Afghani restaurant, and we love this restaurant. We go, for birthdays, anniversaries, and all of this stuff. And you have to go pick up the food and come back to the table. And I happened to go to pick up the food, and I came back, and all of a sudden I see my son stuck in that chair. And my first instinct, for some reason, was to take out my phone and take a picture. Even though I'm not active on social media, it was just like an impulse. I have to get a shot of this. This is like once in a lifetime kind of thing. What's that?
Goes to the wedding.
Yeah, exactly. So here is a really good example because right there you see fear, right? Like it's right there in his face. He's really scared. But anxiety is different because there's an anticipation of future danger, right? So if my son starts to anticipate every time he's going to go to this Afghani restaurant, he's going to get stuck in a chair, that would be him feeling anxious about it, right? But in the moment is when you're feeling that fear. And what happens in our brain is when we're feeling anxious and these thoughts, we start to have these unhelpful thoughts because we have a hard time connecting with that part of our brain. And some unhelpful thoughts can end up sort of driving the anxiety further. We've all had experiences where when you're feeling anxious, you start to think, what if this happens? And then you think you're trying to help yourself by thinking, but because you can't think clearly, you start to have some really unhelpful thoughts, which ends up driving your anxiety further. So then all of a sudden, you're going more and more into that limbic system and then more and more in the reptilian part of the brain until you get into that fight, flight, freeze state. So a little bit about me. So husband, father, who doesn't shy away from feelings. So I come from an East Indian background, and when it comes to avoidant attachment styles, I think we do it pretty well. And so we really don't talk much about emotions. So I've sort of had my own journey getting to a place where I can really appreciate and value emotional experiences. And so yes, all these titles are there: registered psychotherapist, clinical director, clinical supervisor, and so forth, and wannabe public speaker, one day somebody like Brene Brown. But first and foremost, I find the most important thing is to be human, because at the end of the day, that's what we are. It doesn't matter what problems you have, who you are, what your titles are, how much money you have. At the end of the day, we're all human beings. And when I'm in the room with a client, there's sort of this sacred space where nothing else matters but their humanness. And that's what they're looking to me for as well. They're not looking at me as, oh, he's a psychotherapist, he's got something miraculous to say that's going to fix my life. It's more this privilege of going into a person's life, sharing that moment where they're disclosing their pain, really honoring that pain, and being able to relieve some of that pain. I also have lived experience with anxiety. I remember the first time I had anxiety or panic attack, and it's one of the worst things. It's sort of like a line that you cross that you can never go back. And this was in grade 10, and I was home for lunch, just sitting, watching TV, eating food, and all of a sudden, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Nobody was home, so I was just by myself, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. And you start to get the secondary anxiety when you're having a panic attack because you start to think you're dying, and that just makes the anxiety that much worse. And so then, of course, I went to the doctor, maybe thought it was asthma, found out that it was a panic attack. And from there, my life really, really changed because until that point, I never thought something like that could happen. And so you'll have people who work in your organizations, or yourself, you may have had experiences where it feels like your chest is getting tight, your heart's racing, and you start to feel like you're having a heart attack. Some people go to the ER thinking that they are having a heart attack, but that's like a panic attack that people have. And I will say in my life, from that point on, I didn't know how to manage it, and so I did what any young person would do, I guess, maybe. I started to self-medicate, took a path that didn't really help me, quite self-destructive. And my parents, so my mom, she has her PhD in economics. My father has been a banker for 40 years. So they were initially grooming me to be, I guess, the president of the World Bank. Uh, I'm really glad I didn't end up there because I wouldn't want to walk into that shit show. um, but what happened was, eventually, I had the privilege, and I was blessed with people who saw that I had a capacity. I had the capacity to talk to people, and they really sort of reinforced that maybe this is something that you could do. And I really liked that idea because until that point, I never thought that could be like a skill that people would value, and that I could actually get paid for it. So it worked out well because I don't really feel like I'm doing a job. I feel like I'm really there with people. And over the years, I've learned it's not my ability to talk, it's actually my ability to get people to talk. And what I've learned to really build over the years, 90% of being a therapist is really being able to listen and hear and explore the depth of people's experiences. So it's not that I have something wise to say, it's not my ability to talk, it's my ability to listen. One of the things that I've learned about anxiety is, in the beginning, it felt like it was my enemy. It's out to get me. It's going to get me. Maybe I will die from it. Maybe I could have a heart attack. I still, to this day, it's been about 22 years, maybe, since the first panic attack. I still, to this day, can feel those sensations in my body. It comes up in my chest, sometimes in my shoulders. And before, the way I would respond to anxiety was sort of like my enemy. I have to fight it, get rid of it, beat it down, make sure I use every strategy. If it calls on using any medication, let's double down on it, let's get rid of it. It just doesn't work because, like I said, it's a line that you cross, and what you have to realize is anxiety is not your enemy. It's an emotional experience, just like how we feel joy, how we feel pride. People also feel anxious. People also feel depressed at times, and it's part of the spectrum of human emotions. The problem is the more you try to get rid of it, the harder it comes on. So that's when it becomes your enemy, or it seems like it becomes your enemy. The more you try to beat it down, the more it sort of like is amplified in your body. Because anxiety really is like an alarm, right? It's signaling to you there's some sort of threat, and you need to attend to it. And so the more you learn to pick up on those signals, the more you learn to work with that, you start to learn that the anxious part of you is actually not a bad part. It's a really good part, and it's gotten me to some really important places in my life. You know, it's a part of me that is my bodyguard. You know, like I think about important things that are important for the future, not just for myself, but my family, my work. All of that is informed by that anxious part of me. It's just to what degree. You don't want it to let it get to a point where it's paralyzing or it's taking away from your quality of life. And at times, it's a really good advisor. It's there for me. It's picking up on stuff. And you will find that whether it's with yourself or with someone else that you work with, if they're identifying as, you know, a person that's anxious or they're dealing with an anxiety disorder, the last thing you want to do is define them by that. They're a lot more, and the anxiety is just a part of them. It's not all of them. Oh, I love that picture. Please don't tell them. Okay, so back to my son. Let's say if my son says, what if the next time we go to this Afghani restaurant, it's called Bami and Kebab, by the way. It's in Mississauga, just a friendly plug to that restaurant. Yes, Bami and Kebab. So if if my son says, what if the next time we go there and I get stuck and they have to cut me up to get me out? Well, they'll probably have to cut off the chair, not you. But he's probably not going to hear it when he's feeling anxious. So, of course, as a therapist, I know I need to validate that can be a scary experience, being stuck in a chair. Okay, so the other cognitive distortions. So, by the way, cognitive distortions are the ways that we think, especially when we're feeling anxious, distorted thoughts, those unhelpful thoughts that tend to perpetuate the anxiety. It makes it worse. So every time we go to the restaurant, am I going to get stuck? What if I do get stuck every time we go to the restaurant? That would be sort of like all or nothing thinking, because if he's always thinking that the restaurant means getting stuck, I would rather not go, right? And what if someone thinks that I'm dumb because I got stuck in a chair? You know, as I'm saying all of this, there's a part of me that's hearing me say this, and I'm starting to think, oh man, I have another child, and when we go to the restaurant, what if she gets stuck and people think we're dumb as parents? Because, you know, you can't have two children getting stuck in chairs, right? So the worrying, it's like a thinking treadmill. And so those what ifs make it a lot worse. One thought after another, more emotions, so we start to feel more scared. Sometimes we start to feel guilty, sometimes we start to feel sad, because one thought triggers an emotion, and it can trigger another thought, and then it can trigger another emotion, and then you're in this downward spiral. So it is important to be prepared to a point, but when we get into these unhelpful thoughts and we're starting to sink further into it, it can have a paralyzing effect. So there's sort of a middle path here, because the anxiety, it is trying to send a message, it is trying to send a signal to us. The key is being able to figure out what is actually going on there. One of the things that I find that's really helpful is to look at our experience through these different domains. A lot of the times, I think we tend to be focused on the cognitive domain. You know, this information overload, all the stuff that we're learning, you know, everything we're taking in, it's all about cognition. And behavior, I think we also focus on behavior. So those two tend to be the one I think as a society we tend to focus on. So if someone is getting really angry and they're shouting, that, you know, their behavior, or if someone is, you know, avoiding work or they're procrastinating, that's their behavior. And if someone is thinking a certain something, that's their cognition. Those two domains, it's easier to pay attention to. The ones that are much harder to pay attention to are the emotional domains and the sensation domains. And part of the reason why it's hard is because we're not socialized that way. A lot of the times in our childhood, you know, when our parents are talking to us, they're helping us think better, right? They're helping us behave better. They're not, you know, and it's not to like place blame, it's more that they were living in a time where it wasn't within their capacity because of the level of load. Especially you look at our parents' parents, or grandparents, like during times of the Great Depression, and then after that, you know, like our parents just thinking, okay, I just have to give my kids a step up. They didn't necessarily have the space or access to that emotional intelligence, and when it comes to really noticing their sensations and all of that stuff. And we're in a different time in the world now, right? We have a lot more access. We don't, at least COVID has somewhat shifted that, but generally speaking, we have a lot more room to value these experiences, the emotional experiences and sensations and so forth. And what I find is, because we're not socialized that way, one of the hardest things to learn is to be able to notice your own emotions, right? Before we can even talk to somebody else and be curious with them, we need to know how we're feeling on the inside. Because if there's a certain feeling that's driving us, it could cause us to avoid that whole interaction, right? And when it comes to that emotional domain, you can't navigate that space without navigating the sensations. So like I said, an obvious one for me when I'm feeling really anxious is my chest gets tight and my shoulders get tight. And so when my chest gets tight, I could feel my breathing changing. So these are sensations that I start to become more aware of. When I'm feeling guilty, I feel it in my throat. When I'm feeling sad, I feel a heaviness in my whole body, sometimes a heaviness in my head. And so all of us have these sensations that sort of are clues for us that we're feeling certain emotions. And as time goes on, you start to piece together, okay, when I have this sensation, this is what I'm feeling. So then you start to become curious within yourself. What's going on there? Why am I feeling this when I'm about to talk to this person? What's going on? Are there, like Shelley said, are there assumptions that I'm bringing in? Are there my past experiences or biases that I'm bringing in that's triggering a certain emotional experience? And once you become aware of that, then you can gently guide your thinking, right? So you can become more curious. You know what? Even though this is what I'm feeling, I can see it's coming from my past, I'm going to try and engage with this person in a genuine way and get more information so I'm not making those assumptions. When it comes to emotional regulation, especially around anxiety, I find one of the things that's really helpful is as you start to become aware and notice these sensations, you are in a better position to be able to ground yourself, because only when you know it's happening, you can attend to it, right? So then you can ground yourself by paying attention to your breathing, bringing focus to something that's sensory, maybe taste or sounds or whatever it is. And then you ask yourself, what do I need in this moment for comfort? What's going to help me? You know, I had a little piece of candy before I came on stage. That was comforting. And when you comfort yourself, what happens is that emotional experience, that part of your brain, it's not firing as much because it feels a little bit safer, right? So as that's happening and you noticed it, you grounded yourself, you comforted yourself, that's going down, it doesn't feel like much of a threat, and you start to access the higher functioning part of your brain. And then the thoughts that you have are a lot more helpful. The key to awareness is to make sure that you're being compassionate in your awareness towards yourself. When you have a certain sensation show up and you start to feel a certain something, maybe you are feeling anxious, and you start to say to yourself, what the hell is wrong with me? I can't let Maggie down. If you start to have any thoughts like that and you're really judgmental towards yourself, it doesn't really help. In fact, it makes it a lot worse because you inadvertently are triggering more emotions within yourself. So the key is compassion. And for anyone that doesn't know who that is, I hope everybody knows who that is. Yes? Yeah. Mr. Rogers, isn't he just like an amazing human being? I love his saying, I like you the way you are. It's just such a beautiful thing because it allows you to embrace yourself as you are in the moment, regardless of how you're feeling. And you can compassionately notice that and be aware of it. The thing about awareness and the difference between these two, judgmental versus compassionate, is that it can also shape our narratives about ourselves and about other people. And so if you're in your workplace and you're thinking, what's wrong with this person? Notice that. If that's one of your thoughts, and it's probably an indication that maybe there's a sense of helplessness and you've tried and this person keeps coming back with the same issues, and then you get to a stage where you're like, what's wrong with this person? As soon as you say that in your mind, you know that chances are certain emotional experience over time has been building within you that's playing into you being more judgmental towards this person. The other side of it would be what would be helpful for this person. Now, it's not that there's anything wrong with them. How can we support them? How can we facilitate, whether it's their healing or in their workplace, how can we support them? So this would be sort of an authoritarian approach, like just a lot of judgment and power and so forth. And now this side would be permissive. We don't want that either. We don't want to go to the either extreme. We don't want to be authoritarian, and we don't want to be permissive. So meaning, we don't want it to be all about control and power, and we don't want it to be about, oh yeah, I'm being supportive, so I'm just going to let you do whatever, right, without any boundaries. That's not helpful. So you want to be able to honor the person, really get to know them more, understand their situation, and the more you know about their situation, the chances are you're going to be able to better offer support and put things in place so that you can find a middle path, right, where they're still functioning, they're still working, and so then you don't necessarily feel like you're forcing them to work, but you're not necessarily feeling like you're just letting them have, without any sort of consequences. Okay. So I've talked about observing your inner self. I actually think that is the key. It's a lot of times we're thinking about the person on the outside, but if we're not doing our inner work, it's much harder to be curious and empathetic and so forth. I love the fact that Shelly's sitting there because she's like nodding and it's so validating. Yes, we're in the same field and we love it. Okay, yeah. So, a lot of the times when you're in HR or in management, like I said, you start to think about the other person and not you. But when you can make it about you and the other person, and there's a sense of family and connection, it becomes a lot more than just conflict resolution, or like you really do feel like part of the family. Okay, some organizational strategies. Yeah, I love that. That's not my child, by the way. So the thing when it comes to some strategies for trying to put into place in organizations is that you want to look at the big picture. You want to have a bird's eye view of it. You don't want to just look at the person individually and say, okay, well, they're dealing with anxiety, so it's their problem. And so, okay, sure, I'm going to try to support them and maybe be curious and learn about their life. That's all great, but there's still more. And I will say, one of the privileges of being a psychotherapist, and especially attending, an event like this, after an event like this, I get a lot of people that work in, some of your organizations directly reaching out to me and saying, can I book a session with you? And it gives me a chance to sort of glean into, so let's say if somebody reaches out and then I start to see more and more people are reaching out from a certain company, and I see, okay, you know what, this person's dealing with anxiety, this person's dealing with burnout, and so forth and so forth. You start to see some patterns, and it's not just patterns in individuals, but then you start to also notice patterns in organizations. And so as much as we can help individuals, I think it's also really important to take a big step back and have that bird's eye view of what's going on like a organizational level that may be playing into their anxiety. When it comes to anxiety, the emotional intensity of it, with some people you will notice it more, with others you won't notice it as much. And part of the reason why is from like an attachment perspective, some people tend to be on the avoidant attachment side, and some people tend to be on the anxious, ambivalent attachment side, and some people are sort of in the middle somewhere, some secure attachment. When it comes to people with anxious, ambivalent attachment patterns, they've grown up in environments where it hasn't felt safe. So the level of emotional intensity you see from them tends to be higher. So when they're dealing with anxiety, you can sort of see it on the outside. The thing on the other side is people with avoidant attachment styles, they grow up in environments where they know that there's going to be a roof over their head, there's going to be food, all of that sort of security is there, but there isn't that emotional attunement and that emotional expression and room for that. So that domain within them isn't something that they've had a chance to access as much. It's an unfamiliar space for them. So sometimes what you'll find in organizations is you'll see some people who will do 14-hour work days, 6 days a week, and they'll keep going like there's no issues. And within them, that emotional signal would still be going, but they're not really hearing it as much because they're not attuned to it when you look at the avoidant attachment styles. And then you see on the other side, anxious attachment styles. If they're working the same number of days, you start to see them breaking down a lot more. And so it can be very easy, especially in a role like with HR or leadership, if you are doing 12-hour, 14-hour days, and you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't seem to be having a problem with this, I'm totally fine. It still shows up in other aspects of your life. It might be, in your relationships or whatever else it's showing up in, but you may think that you're okay, and you might be wondering, why does this other person suffer so much, right? But in reality, it's just we're all wired differently, not just biologically, but our experiences growing up too. And so when you look at organizational strategies, I think it's really important to have a collaborative approach where you address any sort of systemic issues. If the load is too high, then you make sure to prioritize hiring. You manage that incoming load so you're not straining the system. And you make sure you're setting realistic goals. As much as we're in a world, especially in business, driven by numbers, ROI, and so forth, and we want to keep going and going. Even our economic system is built on that, right? This model of let's keep going more and more and more. Sometimes less is more, right? We need to set realistic goals to make sure we're valuing the human beings in the organization first. Because when we value the human beings in the organization first, you're going to have human beings that will be able to value other human beings, right? So you call a call center, and if their focus is completely on metrics, and they have to take as many calls as possible and have very little time between calls, and we're valuing those numbers, chances are those human beings are not going to be offering good quality customer service that values other human beings. Create a culture of self-care, and I really do mean that. I think someone earlier mentioned this, like when it comes to things like gym memberships, those benefit packages and so forth. I think that's really important, whether it's like massage, chiropractor, and I may have a bit of a bias here. Please make sure you increase psychotherapy benefits. It's really important for people. Make sure you value family matters. Don't make all the conversations about work. Talk about things that happen on the weekend, what kind of food you like, whatever else, right? Like kids, share stuff like that so it doesn't just feel like it's always about work. And this is the most important point. And I noticed everybody before me today, one of their slides always said, like, if you're going to take anything home, make sure you take this. I was like, shit, I don't have anything like that. But as I'm doing my presentation, I'm realizing if there's any one thing that you can take today, I would say most importantly, make sure that you model self-care and work-life balance. And it's very important, because a lot of the times when I see people, especially when there's burnout and anxiety because of this overloaded system, people will say to me, well, like, my manager says it's totally okay if I take time off. My manager says it's okay, I can reduce my load. And I'm like, so what's coming in the way? You know, what's coming in the way of you making that decision? They'll say something along the lines of, well, my manager works like 6 days a week. My manager gets back to me right away when I email her. And so there's a bar that's set inadvertently. My wife, she works in the IT field. She's worked for a bunch of different companies, and especially during the pandemic, the demand for IT professionals was quite high. So she had a lot of opportunities. And the most recent company that she joined, she sort of decided, this is where I'm going to stay for the rest of my life. I think this is where I'm going to retire. And I was like, why? You know, what's so good about this place? Her manager's always talking about his own self-care, and he's like, I'm going to make sure that from 3 to 4, you're going to see on my calendar, important and booked off. It's because he's got to go pick up his kids, right? So he's signaling to people in his team that, well, I'm doing it. If you want to do it, I'm not going to be upset with you, right? He's modeling that. And when it comes to things like vacation days, he's like, you take as many as you need. We don't keep track of it. You just get your work done as you get it done. If there's some important deadlines, I'll make sure to inform you. So that sort of thing, he's modeling that, and he won't reply to emails until the next day. So all of these little signals that he's sending is that, look, my life is important to me, my well-being is important to me, my family is important to me. And so I would be okay if that's important to you too, right? But if we're working extra hard and then we're saying, don't worry, I'll pick up the slack, that's not going to work. People just feel guilty. All right, so you got the point to take home. And if you're doing all of this, you can really celebrate. Really, that's some celebration. Just to make sure I'm on time. Time is okay? 5 minutes? Okay, cool. All right. So this whole thing about unprecedented times, in the last 2.5 years, really, it's been one after another, right? Like, we thought COVID, March 2020, that shook up our world, and we thought that was terrible, and then we hear about, more recently, the war, inflation, interest rates. It's like one after another. And so what's happening is there's this underlying experience of anxiety that we're all sitting with, right? And we try to put our head in the sand and keep going, but still there is this anxiety, right? Like, people are worried about interest rates, people are worried about housing prices and inflation and so forth. And so that, it's almost like we're on an ongoing basis, there's a sense of anxiety lingering in the background. And that can be really hard to live with, right? So that health anxiety, financial anxiety, existential crisis, I'll talk more about that. But the health and financial anxiety, I think that's really, over the last 2.5 years, it's changed. I look back to my life before the pandemic, and I wasn't worried about things like this, right? I wasn't worried about, what if there's long COVID? What if the interest rates go up so much? Did we make a bad decision with the house? I didn't have to think about those things before the pandemic. Those were good times. I used to have hair back then. And it has really transformed my life. And when it comes to the whole hair thing, funny story, my wife, I told her, I was like, it was so nice when I had hair. It's so different now. And she was like, no, you actually look better without hair. And I was like, I don't know if I really wanted to hear that. But my wife, she can be a very sort of strong personality, and she has good intentions, and she wanted to prove it to me. So what she did is, like, she took the phone, went into Google Photos, went back in time 3 years ago, and she's like, look at this picture, and she zoomed in, and she's like, you see that receding hairline? It's much better now. So she proved to me that this was a good decision. Okay, so when it comes to existential crisis, when we live in a state where there's so much worry and you get tired, you get mentally and emotionally exhausted, you get to a point where you start to think, what's the point? Right? What's the point of all of this? And I've been in sort of like an interesting situation over the last 2.5 years. Like I said, as much as ordinary brown man in the psychotherapy field, now it's sort of like an extraordinary situation where there's just so much demand for mental health. Everybody wants to see a therapist, and it's been sort of like a good thing and a bad thing because it's become hard to manage the load. And I keep asking myself, what's the point? What's the point of all of this? And sometimes I find being able to just take my daughter to the river, have a bunch of fries, take my son, play soccer, grab a couple of beers, listen to music. Those moments feel so much more precious to me than anything else, right? Doesn't matter money, title, whatever else. Those experiences where you feel like you're living, right? I think that's at the end of the day the point. And so when it comes to this existential crisis, we're all kind of in a state where we're questioning what's important to me. And it's not just me. I think a lot of people have questioned it over the course of the pandemic, and that's why we've seen, retention rates and all of this stuff being affected, because people are starting to ask, what's more important to me? Do I want to work harder, or do I want to have a quality of life where I can really live? So that's why people are really shaking things up. I didn't realize this was going to be highlighted. 86 billion neurons, 2.5 billion heartbeats for an average 70-year life, and one life. So think about that for a moment. 86 billion neurons in our brain, approximately. And from the moment you are conceived, we're actually expecting a third, and so this kind of really makes me think, because they give you the heartbeat, the baby's heartbeat, makes you think from the moment your heart starts beating, approximately 2.5 billion heartbeats, right? And one life, that's all we get. One life. So part of what that anxiety is signaling is make sure you live it, right? Make sure you live your life. And so should we shut that off? Should we shut off that signal, the alarm, that's saying, live, 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 live? It's trying to remind us to live. Should we shut it off? Probably not a good idea, because we'd be swimming upstream. So what we need to do instead is to really protect our life. Set boundaries so that you can protect your life. Prioritize your well-being. Be a positive model for self-care. If you've set precedents where people view you as a person that's an extremely hard worker and it's become part of your identity, and you've set that precedence, yes, it's going to be extremely challenging, but break that precedence because you have one life. Make sure you value your ability to connect. How precious is that? There were billions of sperm, and one got through, and then there's another billions of sperm, and another one got through, and then there's JD and me talking, right? You can talk, and I can talk. You can think, and I can think. How precious is that? Right? Yeah. Our ability to connect. So all of this, calls on why it's so important to prioritize, that quality of work and life, because if we don't have that and we're just thinking quantity, 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 it's not going to result in good things. JD, in one of the meetings, he said, instead of return on investment, value on investment, that really kind of stuck out to me. And that kind of speaks to that point, because if you can really value, your values around human beings and life, if you can really value that, the return on investment is going to follow, right? If you value quantity more, that's not going to work. Some of you are probably like, what? You're done? That was an abrupt transition, man. It was like 2 nights before it was due, I finished this presentation. So I didn't know how to end it. So I can see if you're wondering, like, why is this ending so abrupt? And some of you are like, thank God he's done. It's been a long 2 days. This is my part of me that's, got that imposter syndrome. That part of me is like, we're good, we're done. I'm here. Feel free to reach out. My shameless plug, Harry@ChettiarCounselling.ca, and whenever you want, reach out. Okay. Thank you.